They told us the Emperor's will was our salvation, that to serve aboard a black ship was to serve humanity itself. But when the hatches sealed and the warp engines groaned to life, that faith began to wither. There are sounds inside a black ship that no mortal should hear. The slow, metallic breathing of the hull as it resists the tides of the Imperium. The low sobs of those who know what they truly are, and somewhere deeper still, the faint whispering of things that were never meant to speak. I was one of them. A psyker, taken from my world before my 17th summer, branded and promised redemption through service. They said the journey to Terra was an honor, but honor does not scream in the dark. It does not claw at the walls begging for air. The truth of the black ships is not the one sung in imperial hymns. It is the one carved into the souls that never make it home. Before I tell you what I saw, what I heard beneath the decks of the Emperor's harvesters, you must understand this. Not all prisoners aboard were heretics. Some of us still prayed. Some of us still believed. And some of us, Emperor forgive us, still felt something answer back. If the stories of the Imperium haunt you as they haunt me, if you seek to understand what truly becomes of those taken in his name, then stay with me. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel so that more of the Emperor's lost can be heard and their echoes remembered. The black ship arrived without warning. No Vox transmission. No heraldic flare across the upper atmosphere. One morning the sky simply changed. Its light fractured, became a dull bronze as though the sun itself recoiled from what drifted above. I remember the sound first. A bass hum that made my teeth ache, deep and ancient, like the vibration of some buried cathedral organ. Even before we saw the vessel, every child in the hab blocks went still. Even the wind stopped moving. I was in the manufactorum then, sealing crates of plasteel rivets, when the overseer's klaxon wailed 3 tones, the sound reserved for orbital descent. We crowded by the open gantries and there it was, a shadow moving against the clouds, its form too massive to understand. The black ship. None of us had ever seen one, only heard sermons about them. Vessels of holy purpose, the Emperor's reapers of the Witchborn, but there was nothing holy in its shape. It looked less built than grown, a black iron carcass with spines and domes that pulsed with distant light. It eclipsed the heavens. By dusk the arbitrators came. They sealed the streets with riot shields etched with the imperial aquila, their visors glinting under the light of oil lamps. Behind them came the clerics, chanting hymns I did not recognize. The words were meant to soothe, but their voices shook. Each block was ordered to assemble by number. Lists were read, names drawn from census records, hospital ledgers, and confessional logs. Those called did not return. My mother held my hand so tightly that her nails cut into my palm. She kept whispering, "Don't look at them. Don't think of them." But it didn't matter. They had already found me. A robed scribe holding a data slate stopped before me, his eyes unfocused, lips moving in silent calculation. Then he nodded to the arbitrator beside him. The man's gauntleted hand rested on my shoulder. "Psychana tithe," he said flatly. My mother screamed something, but I couldn't hear the words. There was only the sound of the black ship above us, its engines breathing like a wounded god. I wanted to say something, to tell her I wasn't like those they took. I'd never made anything float, never heard voices. But I remembered the dreams, the flickers of fire under my eyelids, the whispers that said my name when I was alone. I realized then they hadn't chosen wrong. They bound my wrists with prayer cords and led me through the ranks of silent citizens. No one met my gaze. Every step toward the shuttle felt like walking deeper into a grave. The shuttle that bore us to the black ship was little more than a steel box with engines. The air inside tasted of rust and incense, and the walls thrummed with a rhythm that was not quite mechanical, as though the ship itself were murmuring a prayer beneath its breath. We were 30 souls crammed into that hold, each bound and hooded. Our names erased the moment the ramp sealed. Somewhere in the dark, a woman sobbed until a guard struck her silent. I remember the jolt as we breached the upper atmosphere, the weight pressing into my chest, and the faint crackle of the vox as orders passed between unseen officers. No one spoke to us. No one explained what awaited above. We were no longer citizens of our world. We were cargo. When the hood was finally pulled away, light stabbed my eyes. Not the light of a star, but the sickly white of lumen strips stretching endlessly down the docking bay. I saw the black ship's interior for the first time. Its walls were ribbed with arches like a cathedral turned inside out. Statues of robed figures lined the corridors, their faces half erased by centuries of candle soot. Every surface was engraved with litanies in high Gothic, each stroke of scripture filled with wax and dried blood. A custodian was there, not one of the Emperor's golden demigods, but an Adeptus Astra Telepathica warden, cloaked in black with a helm shaped like a skull. His presence froze the air. He moved down the line of us, silent, holding a sensor device that flickered with green light. When it passed near me, the device clicked once, but sharply. The warden paused. Through the filter of his Vox grill came a sound almost like a sigh. "Level 3 potential," he said. "Untrained." The guard beside him nodded, marking my wrist with a thin brand that hissed against the skin. The smell of burnt flesh mingled with the incense haze. I bit back a cry. They moved on without a word. Later, we were herded through a narrow passage where the ship's hull vibrated like the strings of some colossal instrument. I could hear voices, not human ones, resonating through the metal, singing in tones too low for sense. It felt as if the ship itself was alive, its bulk held together by prayers and fear. Some said that the black ships carried fragments of bound demons within their cores, to better anchor them in the warp. Others whispered that the Emperor's will alone kept them from falling into madness. I didn't know which rumor was worse. As we reached the holding cells, one of the younger tithed, a boy no older than 12, turned to me. His eyes were too bright, his lips trembling. "Will we see Terra?" he asked. I wanted to answer. I wanted to give him hope. But the truth was still burning into my wrist, a mark that promised no sunrise. We did not see stars when the ship departed, only the endless dark of the void closing over us like a shroud. The first night aboard, if it could be called a night, stretched beyond reason. The black ship had no windows, no rhythm of light and shadow, no marker of time. Only the low thrum of engines and the ceaseless hiss of ventilation carried through the metal halls. The air was thick with recycled breath and chemical sedatives. When I tried to sleep, I could feel vibrations under the cot, small, irregular pulses that seemed to follow my heartbeat. They had separated us by ability. Those whose minds burned too brightly were taken deeper, beyond the bulkhead gates. None ever returned. The rest of us were left in rows of narrow cells, each with a lumen that flickered at precise intervals. A calculated strobe meant to dull the mind. The ship wanted obedience, not sanity. At some point, the sound began, a whispering at the edge of hearing, like fabric tearing underwater. At first, I thought it was the vents, or the hum of the power conduits. But the words grew clearer, threads of speech woven through the air. Some were prayers, others curses. Sometimes I heard my name. Sometimes I heard my mother's voice. I pressed my palms against my ears until the skin split. It didn't help. The guards called it the murmur, a side effect of proximity to the warp. They told us to repeat the Emperor's creed whenever it began. Through his light we are made silent. But the murmur did not fear his name. It grew louder each time I spoke it, like laughter echoing through the soul. I remember one moment vividly. A woman in the cell opposite mine began to scream. Not in pain, but in joy. Her eyes rolled back as she laughed, arms spread wide. The lumen above her flared, and I saw something crawl out of her mouth. a shape made of light twisting like smoke. The guards arrived instantly. There was no shouting, no ceremony. A flash, the smell of ozone, then silence. They carried her away wrapped in white cloth, humming a hymn. That was when I understood what the tithe truly meant. We were not passengers bound for Terra. We were offerings. Each of us measured, monitored, and weighed against some invisible threshold. Only the few whose minds survived the voyage would see the golden throne. The rest would feed it. Days or perhaps weeks passed in that suspended state. My thoughts began to fragment. I found myself reciting prayers I didn't remember learning. I began to dream of a voice that spoke through walls of gold. A voice that told me I was not damned, only chosen. But when I woke, my mouth tasted of iron, and the air smelled faintly of burning oil. That was when I first heard the footsteps outside my cell. Slow, measured, heavy as judgment. The footsteps stopped outside my door. For a moment, there was only the faint crackle of static from the overhead lumen. Then the lock disengaged with a hiss, and the cell door opened inward, spilling pale light across the floor. A figure stood there, tall, cloaked in dark fabric that shimmered faintly with circuitry. His face was hidden behind a mask of burnished steel, featureless save for a single vertical slit, where faint blue light pulsed. When he spoke, the vox distorted his words into a tone that felt both human and mechanical. "Designation 12 Mark III, he said. "Unbound Psyker. Accompany me." I tried to stand, but my legs trembled beneath me. He didn't wait. He turned and began walking down the corridor, expecting obedience. I followed because there was nothing else to do. The halls of the black ship seemed endless, a cathedral of iron veins and pulsing conduits. Scriptural engravings covered every surface, most too ancient to read. Some glowed faintly, powered by veins of bioluminescent circuitry that pulsed in rhythm with the ship's engines. We passed rows of sealed doors, behind which came faint weeping, or the muted thump of fists against steel. At one point I glimpsed a window, or what I thought was one. Beyond it stretched not the stars, but a churning sea of red mist like blood suspended in water. The warden must have noticed my hesitation. "Do not look," he said. "The Geller field is thin here." We descended deeper, following stairwells where gravity seemed to shift and sigh, as though the ship's heart beat unevenly. The air grew colder, sharper. I could smell chemicals, old oil, and something else. Something sweet and wrong, like burnt honey. Finally, we entered a vast chamber. It was circular, lined with hexagonal alcoves filled with bodies. Each was restrained, heads encased in glass helms, eyes rolled back. Thousands of them suspended in fluid, their mouths moving in perfect unison. I realized they were praying, not in words but in resonance, their thoughts feeding into a single psychic choir. The sound wasn't audible. It was felt, a trembling in the bones, a vibration in the lungs. "This," the warden said, "is the choir below." He gestured toward a raised platform where a cluster of robed adepts monitored data slates and whispered into vox beads. The air shimmered around them as if the laws of reality were thinner in their presence. "You will join them when the conditioning is complete," he continued. "Until then, you will observe." I looked up at the nearest figure in the tanks, a woman with pallid skin and veins glowing faintly beneath it. Her face was calm, almost serene, though I sensed nothing but endless fatigue radiating from her. "What are they saying?" I asked, my voice breaking. The warden's mask turned toward me. "They are saying what must be said to keep the warp at bay. They speak the Emperor's name without pause. If they stop, we all die." He started to walk away, but paused for a moment. "Some of them," he added quietly, "have been singing since before you were born." As he left me standing in that vast chamber of frozen devotion, I felt something stir behind my eyes. A flicker of heat, a pulse not my own. For the first time, I wondered if I could hear their song, and then just faintly I did. It was not prayer. It was a plea. I never learned how long we had been adrift before the descent began. Time on the black ship was a lie told by flickering lights and the hum of machinery. Every day bled into the next until the concept of dawn became meaningless. The only constant was the metallic taste in the air, recycled, filtered, sanctified, and the way the ship seemed to groan like an animal in its sleep. Then, one cycle, everything changed. The lights dimmed, the air pressure dropped, and the Vox alarms began to wail in tones too low for comfort. The crew didn't speak, but their movements sharpened. I saw wardens moving down the corridors with incense sensors, marking each bulkhead with wax sigils. Something was coming. We were ordered from our cells and herded down into the lower decks. The Iron Descent, they called it. I thought it a name, but soon realized it was literal. The corridor sloped downward into the core of the ship, where the heat grew unbearable, and the air thickened with vapor. The walls were lined with pipes that bled condensation like sweat. Every few meters, another servitor was fused into the bulkhead. Eyeless, mouthless, its flesh merged with metal, its chest rising and falling to the rhythm of some unseen machine. The further we went, the more the black ship seemed to breathe. You could feel it, a pulse underfoot, a tremor in the railing as though the vessel itself were alive and straining against its bindings. One of the tithed beside me, a man from the agri-fields, began muttering scripture under his breath. Another started laughing quietly. By the time the laughter turned to sobs, the guard struck him down with shock batons and left his body behind. No one protested. When we reached the descent's terminus, a massive gate awaited, wrought iron carved with wards and the Imperial Aquila. Beyond it, faint blue light flickered like dying stars. The warden leading us turned and raised his hand for silence. "Do not speak from this point onward," he said. "The walls listen, and they remember." He opened the gate. Beyond was a cavern of impossible size. Massive chains hung from the ceiling, suspending metal platforms that swayed gently over a pit of mist. Ladders connected each level like strands of a web. Above us in the darkness, faint outlines of human figures drifted in suspension tanks. Hundreds of them, their bodies lit by ghostly light. It took me a moment to realize what the space was. A processing tier. Every psyker bound for Terra passed through it. Each soul cataloged, weighed, and sorted according to its strength, like ore mined for purity. One by one, we were called to the center. There, a ring of robed adepts worked machines covered in parchment and wax. They asked no questions, only measured. Pulse, resonance, thought density, and psychic flux. When my turn came, one of them placed a cold hand against my forehead and whispered a benediction I could not understand. The machinery around us screamed. "Level 3 confirmed," the adept said, voice flat. "Stable under duress." I saw the faintest tremor in his hand before he marked my record with red ink. That was when I first noticed the smell. Something sharp, coppery, and strangely familiar. I turned and realized the mist that drifted beneath the platforms was not vapor. It was steam rising from a pit filled with blood. The air was heavy with the scent, iron and sanctified oil, a mixture that coated the lungs and made every breath feel like swallowing ash. The adepts said nothing about it. To them it was routine. To me it was revelation. The black ship was not a vessel. It was a factory of souls. From the edges of the platform I could see silhouettes moving below, hooded figures guiding corpses into narrow channels that fed the pit. Every few moments the platform would shudder as unseen machinery deep beneath us ground to life, accompanied by the rhythmic tolling of bells that had no source. The sound didn't echo. It vibrated, running up through the metal like a heartbeat that didn't belong to anything alive. I was led away from the testing dais into a smaller chamber, where the light was dim and golden, filtered through incense haze. 3 adepts worked at consoles of tarnished brass, surrounded by servo skulls that drifted in slow circles, their vox grills whispering fragments of catechism. The chamber walls were lined with cages, and within each sat a psyker, slumped and trembling, their collars glowing faintly blue. The air around them shimmered with psychic discharge, flickers of energy that snapped against the iron mesh. One of the adepts gestured toward me. "Level 3, he said to his superior, a woman whose robes bore the sigil of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with scar tissue from decades of staring into the warp. She approached me without hesitation, studying the brand on my wrist. "Do you dream?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Of what?" "Light," I said. "And sometimes voices." She inclined her head slightly, not surprised. "They are testing the boundaries," she said. "Do not answer when they call. The warp is an echo chamber, and every whisper you return feeds it." She turned to the adepts. "Prepare him for acclimation." I was stripped, washed in freezing chemical water, and fitted with a collar like the others. It clamped against the base of my skull with a sound I will never forget. A dry, decisive click that felt like my name being erased. Immediately, a wave of nausea rippled through me as my thoughts dimmed, muffled behind an invisible wall. The world grew quieter, but not safe. They brought me to a row of empty cells deeper in the processing hold. Each was marked with a symbol, a downward-pointing sigil of restraint, painted in rust-colored pigment. The cell door sealed with a whisper, locking me into a space no larger than a coffin. Time lost meaning again. Sometimes the lights would flash red and alarms would echo through the deck. Other times, a low vibration passed through the walls that felt like something vast brushing against the hull. During one such moment, I pressed my ear to the iron and heard it clearly. Not the hum of engines, not the murmur of machinery, but the faint rhythmic chanting of 1,000 unseen voices. They were praying in unison, not to the Emperor, but to something beneath him. Something that pulsed in the warp like a wounded star. The next time the adepts came, I was ready to listen. They arrived in silence as they always did. 3 adepts and a single warden, his helm shaped like a mourning mask. The adepts carried instruments of glass and wire, their ends tipped with dull needles that pulsed faintly with psychic resonance. The warden didn't speak. His task was presence, a warning carved into living form. One of the adepts pressed a hand to my collar, murmuring activation rites. The device grew warm against my skin, and the low hum that filled my skull sharpened into a steady tone. I could feel it, a suppression field tightening around my mind, squeezing thought until it thinned to a thread. My vision swam. "Breathe," the adept said. "Do not resist the current. You are being attuned." I tried to comply, but the sensation was unbearable. It felt like being submerged in molten glass. Thoughts slipped from me, melting before they could form. I saw flashes, my homeworld, my mother's face, the sky turning bronze. Then all of it blurred, replaced by a single overwhelming sound, the pulse of the ship's heart beating in perfect rhythm with my own. The adepts began chanting. Their voices wove through the air like strands of static, syllables older than language. The walls responded, humming back to them. And in that resonance, something else stirred, a whisper that wasn't human. "You are seen." The words burned through my skull, silent yet undeniable. I convulsed, falling to my knees. One of the adepts reached for a control rune, increasing the collar's intensity. Pain bloomed like light behind my eyes. "Containment failing," another voice said. "He's receiving through the bleed." "Then block him," the warden snarled. Before it notices." The pain spiked, and for a moment the world fractured. I saw through walls, through metal and bone, into a space that wasn't space at all. A vast ocean of red and gold fire, shapes moving within it, faces both divine and monstrous. One of them looked back, and then everything went dark. When I woke, the chamber was quiet. The adepts were gone. Only the warden remained, standing motionless by the door. He regarded me for a long moment before speaking. "You heard it, didn't you?" he asked softly. I nodded, throat dry. "What was it?" He hesitated. Even through the distortion of the Vox grill, I could hear something that almost sounded like fear. "There are things," he said, "that even the Emperor dares not name. We pass through their realm and sometimes they see us looking back." He turned to leave but paused. "Pray that it forgets you." Then he was gone and the hum of the ship returned, deep and slow, like a sleeping god shifting in its dreams. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because somewhere in the darkness beneath the mechanical heartbeats and the iron prayers, I could still hear that whisper. "You are seen." After that day, the air itself began to change. It carried a pressure that wasn't physical, a kind of awareness, like the ship's corridors were quietly listening to us breathe. I tried not to speak, not to think too loudly, but it made no difference. Once something in the warp knows your name, silence becomes meaningless. The adepts no longer came for testing. Instead, food was delivered through a mechanical hatch once every few cycles. A tasteless gray paste served in sanctified rations. I ate because hunger reminded me I was still flesh, not vapor or thought. Most of the others had stopped eating entirely. They sat motionless in their cells, eyes open, lips moving in silent rhythm. Some had begun to glow faintly at the edges, their skin lit from within by the warp's residue. Once I saw one of them taken. The warden arrived with 2 servo skulls trailing incense smoke, and they opened her cell without ceremony. She didn't resist. They strapped her to a litter of brass and bone, then carried her upward toward the processing decks. She looked at me as she passed, not pleadingly, but with calm resignation. "He's coming," she whispered. "Not for the ship. For us." After that, the lights flickered every few hours, and I started counting them as days. I wasn't sure what we were waiting for, but the hum of the engines was different now. Irregular, like a heartbeat skipping. Somewhere deep in the hull, I heard what sounded like a scream, muffled through steel, long and low, echoing through the vents. The next time the alarm klaxon sounded, it wasn't a drill. The walls shuddered violently, and a wave of psychic pressure rolled through the decks. The collars around our necks flared white, flooding our veins with suppressants. I fell to the floor, gasping. The air tasted of blood and burning copper. Then came the voice. It wasn't the whisper I had heard before. This was deeper, vast and cold, speaking through the entire ship as though the hull itself were its throat. Words rolled through the metal, impossible to understand, yet impossible not to feel. My thoughts collapsed beneath them, crushed under meaning too immense for language. And amid it all, another sound, human, desperate. The chanting of the choir below. Thousands of psychers crying out the Emperor's name, holding the ship's soul together with faith alone. Their agony poured through the deck plates in waves of psychic heat, searing the air with invisible fire. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The hum returned. The lights steadied. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Somewhere beyond my cell, I heard the warden's voice, distant and metallic. "We've entered the warp," he said. "Brace the seals." The Emperor watches, but I knew he was wrong. Something else was watching now. They say the choir sings unceasingly, its voices woven into the very engine of the ship, a chorus of agony powering our passage through madness. I used to think that was just a phrase, a metaphor, but when I heard them for the first time, I understood. This ship doesn't travel through the warp. It screams through it, The sound began as a tremor in the floor. Not quite vibration, more like breath. Then it grew, layer upon layer of voices, some high and desperate, others guttural, raw, almost animal. A harmony of suffering so perfect it became music. My blood moved in rhythm with it. My heartbeat synced to the beat of 1,000 dying souls. I pressed my ear to the wall. The metal was warm, almost alive. Behind it I could feel the choir, buried in decks below, their bodies wired into machines that fed off their minds. Some of them had been here for years, perhaps decades, sustained only by the Emperor's will and the ship's cruel mercy. The warden entered my cell without a word. His armor was slick with condensation. The ship was sweating again. "You've been called," he said. I wanted to ask what that meant, but his tone made questions useless. They led me downward, deeper than I'd ever been allowed before. The air thickened with incense and heat. The corridors were lined with prayer script etched in blood, fresh and glistening. Servo skulls floated past carrying censers, their trails forming an unbroken cloud of sanctified smoke. I could hear the chanting grow louder, the ship's heartbeat slowing as if to listen. At the base of a spiral stair, the warden stopped. "Do not look directly at them," he warned. "Even through the seals, the sight of the choir can unmake you." But when the doors opened, I couldn't help it. The choir wasn't a room. It was a cathedral of flesh, thousands of psychers suspended in a web of cables and veins, their bodies fused into the walls, their faces locked in perpetual exhalation. Glowing conduits ran from their skulls into a colossal engine of black glass, pulsing with psychic light. Every time one of them screamed, a flare of warp energy rippled through the core, propelling us forward, one heartbeat closer to damnation. An adept approached, face hidden behind a silver mask. "He resonates with the signal," she said. "He heard it before the others. He can strengthen the weave." The warden nodded, though his jaw was tight. "Then use him." Before I could move, they seized me. The collar at my throat disengaged with a hiss, and for the first time since my capture, the pressure in my skull released. It felt like tearing open a wound. My thoughts surged outward, uncontrolled, and then I heard them. Not the adepts, not the choir. The things beyond. The presence that had whispered to me before. "You are seen," but now it added something more. "You are chosen." The world exploded in light and fire. I saw the warp unfold. Infinite shapes, colors that bled, faces blooming from the dark. My mind stretched until it screamed. I saw the ship not as metal, but as a living organism. A wounded leviathan crawling through a sea of gods. And then, for the briefest moment, I saw him. The Emperor, or something wearing his light, standing in the storm. His gaze endless and sorrowful. "Forgive me," I whispered, but he did not look at me, he looked through me. When I awoke, the choir was silent. Only the soft hum of machinery filled the void, and I was no longer bound to the slab. My throat burned where the collar had been, a thin line of blood tracing down my neck like a red string. I could still hear echoes of the voice, the one that had called me chosen, reverberating behind my eyes, whispering between my thoughts. The adepts were gone. The warden too. Only the psychers remained, suspended in their eternal torment. Their bodies no longer moved, but faint pulses still traveled through the veins that connected them to the ship's core. Each beat glowed with a dull golden light, like the last embers of a dying sun. I realized that I could feel those pulses, inside me. Every rhythm of the choir now matched my heartbeat. Every sigh, every psychic exhalation aligned with my breathing. I stumbled forward. The floor beneath my feet was slick with condensation and plasma residue. The air tasted of metal and ozone. One of the psycher's eyes flickered open as I passed, a milky, colorless orb that rolled toward me without will or life. Still, I felt seen. That was when the walls began to whisper again. At first I thought it was the ship, its usual murmuring through pipes and conduits, but no, these were words. Faint, impossible words. They came from the metal itself, from the veins of the vessel, as if the ship were alive and speaking in a tongue I was never meant to hear. Faith is flesh, it said. Flesh is signal. I pressed my hand against the wall. It was warm, burning even. Underneath the metal skin, I could feel a pulse that matched my own. For a moment I couldn't tell if the ship was breathing or if I was. The corridor shuddered. Lights flared crimson. Warning runes scrolled across the walls like glowing scripture. The warp was stirring again. Somewhere someone screamed through the vox, a sound cut off by static and wet tearing. The warden's voice crackled through the speaker above me. Containment breach in subdeck 9. Choir interference detected. All adepts maintain psychic suppression. But I could feel the truth pulsing through the floor. There was no containment breach. The choir was trying to sing again, and this time they wanted me to join them. I tried to run, but the walls closed in. The lights twisted into spirals, glowing with impossible geometry. I could see shapes moving within the metal. Outlines of faces, hands pressing outward. Mouths opening in silent cries. The voice in my head, that same impossible, holy whisper, grew louder. You hear because you are near the center. You see because you are seen. I stumbled, clutching my head, blood dripping from my nose. The floor buckled beneath me, and for a moment I thought I'd fall straight through into the void. But instead I landed before the choir's core, a towering sphere of glass and gold, pulsing like a living heart. Inside it, light moved like liquid thought, and I realized that light wasn't machinery. It was souls. The trapped echoes of every psyker this ship had ever consumed, spiraling endlessly in the Emperor's name. They were not just powering the warp jump. They were becoming it. One of the adepts appeared beside me, his robes torn, blood pouring from his eyes. It's awake, he croaked. The ship mind, the Emperor's echo. Do you see it too? I nodded, but not because I wanted to. Because something inside me compelled it. The adepts fell to their knees. Then it has chosen you, he whispered, before his body convulsed and went still. And suddenly I understood. The black ship was not only a vessel for psychers. It was a shrine, a colossal reliquary of human thought, feeding the Astronomicans' flame through pain and prayer. But something had changed. Something was listening back. I turned to the choir once more, and every dead face turned toward me in unison. Their mouths opened, soundlessly at first, then with a single phrase that filled the room with thunder. The signal is flesh. The lights went out, and in the dark, something vast and golden breathed my name. When the lights returned, I was no longer in the choir chamber. I stood on the observation deck, alone, surrounded by the stench of burnt incense and the faint ozone tang of the ship's reactor bleed. The viewport stretched before me, and beyond it the warp boiled like a living wound. It should have been madness, that sight. It should have torn my mind apart. But somehow it was beautiful. The colors were wrong, the shapes impossible, and yet I felt a symmetry within the chaos. A kind of terrible order pulsing beneath the surface. I could see faces in the storm, human and not. Some bore halos of light, others the cruel geometry of demons, and among them all, there was one vast silhouette that dwarfed everything else, a shape like a man seated upon a throne of flame. Even through the armor of the Geller field, I could feel his gaze fall upon me. My heart clenched, and for a moment the deck seemed to dissolve, leaving only that impossible figure in the sea of unreality. I fell to my knees. The warp screamed and sang in equal measure. You carry my light, the voice said. Or perhaps it wasn't a voice at all, but memory given form. It wasn't sound, it was presence. Every word burned into my skull like scripture. You walk among the lost. You will guide them to me. But there was something else beneath the words, a flicker of sorrow, almost human. Then, just as quickly as it began, the vision shattered. The deck reformed around me. Red warning sigils flared across the consoles, and the hum of the Geller field screamed back into focus. The warp outside twisted violently, the black ship shuddering as if struck by an invisible tide. I could hear the psychers wailing again through the lower decks, their agony feeding the shield that kept us from being consumed. And then came the realization that chilled me to the core. The choir's song wasn't holding the warp out. It was keeping something in. The ship groaned. Sparks burst from the ceiling. Somewhere deep below, bulkheads sealed with the thunder of adamantium locks. I could feel the machine spirit's fear like static in my teeth. Bridge to choir control. Respond. A voice barked through the vox. Containment levels critical. Report psychic bleed at once. I reached for the vox grill. I don't know why, instinct perhaps. But when I touched it, the static turned into whispers again. Countless voices overlapping, pleading. He sees you. He remembers. He wants to return. My hands trembled. The air grew heavy. Shadows warped across the walls, forming silhouettes that didn't match the lights above. I turned, and for an instant I saw them. Hundreds of psychers, drifting through the corridors like phantoms. Their eyes hollow and mouths still singing that same phrase. The signal is flesh. Their bodies passed through the bulkhead as if it were water, each one leaving trails of gold light that faded into dust. They were coming upward, toward the bridge, toward me. I ran. Every corridor pulsed with warp light, every lumen strobing with madness. The servitors lining the halls twitched and convulsed, their mechanical limbs locking into prayer poses, as though beseeching something unseen. One by one, their vox emitters activated, and through each came the same whisper, "He is near." When I reached the command deck, I found only silence. The officers were still at their stations, but their faces were wrong, smooth, eyeless, sculpted into masks of devotion. Their hands moved automatically over controls that no longer responded. In the center of the room stood the navigator, her third eye open, glowing with a light that wasn't her own. "Do you see it?" she asked, her voice echoing from somewhere far beyond her throat. I could barely speak. "See what?" Her smile was slow, reverent. "The Emperor's reflection in the storm." And then she pointed, not at the viewport, but through it. I followed her gesture, and there, amid the burning clouds of the warp, I saw the same colossal figure again. Only this time it wasn't seated. It was rising. The navigator's body burned away in silence, her soul flaring like a beacon. And outside, the warp began to bend toward us. Not with rage, but with hunger. The black ship's engines howled. The choir screamed in unison. And I finally understood. The Emperor's light was not only guiding the Imperium across the stars, it was also calling something back. Something that should never have heard him. The storm outside the viewport had become a sunless sea, rippling with color and heat. It was as if every nightmare of mankind had been melted down into light and poured across eternity. Yet amidst that boiling madness, the golden figure persisted, vast, distant, but somehow nearer with every passing second. The ship's alarms wailed. Vox channels erupted with overlapping prayers and orders, the words blurring into one continuous chant. Someone was shouting about psychic feedback surges, another about the Geller field fracturing, but their voices were lost beneath the deeper sound. The rhythm of the warp itself, thundering like a titanic heartbeat. I gripped the railing, my knuckles white, trying to steady myself. The vibration ran through every bone in my body, setting my teeth on edge. The light outside began to flicker in strange, deliberate pulses, long, short, long, repeating like a code. I knew that rhythm. I'd heard it before. It was the same pattern the choir used when they called out to the Astronomicon. But this time, the Astronomicon was answering back. The figure raised its hand, and the warp parted like smoke before a wind. For a single heartbeat, I saw through it. Not emptiness, not space, but something worse. A great chasm of black glass filled with 1,000 mirrored faces, each one human, each one me. My reflection stretched across infinity, all of us watching, all of us mouthing the same words. The signal is flesh. Then the glass shattered. A psychic blast tore through the deck, throwing me to the ground. Every lumen exploded, plunging the bridge into darkness broken only by the glow of the warp beyond. I could hear the screams of crewmen, twisting into voices that were not their own, deep, harmonic, impossibly vast. The Geller field had begun to bleed. Somewhere deep in the ship, the machine spirit howled in binary agony. I could feel it, the pain traveling through the deck plates into my spine, and then the shadows moved. They slid along the walls like liquid, gathering into shapes. Human shapes, officers, adepts, psychers, all forged from darkness and gold. They stepped out from the metal as if it were air, eyes burning with inner light. "Do you understand now?" one of them asked. Its voice was calm, melodic, yet hollow. "You are the vessel, the flesh bridge, the song reborn." I backed away. "What are you?" The thing smiled. Its face was almost kind. "We are what remains of those who sang before you. Fragments of devotion, echoes of the Emperor's dream." I wanted to deny it, to scream that they were demons. But as I looked closer, I recognized their faces. One was the warden, another the adept who had freed me, another the navigator who had burned. All of them stood together now, radiant with a golden shimmer that felt more holy than profane. "Why me?" I whispered. "Because you listened," said the warden's shade. "Because you still believe." The ship lurched violently, throwing us all against the walls. The warp outside surged forward, a tidal wave of unreality slamming against the Geller field. Sparks danced across the floor as conduits overloaded. The choir's voices rose once more, louder than ever, their song splitting into layers upon layers of pleading, prayer, and rage. And then I heard it, a second voice joining theirs, my own, unbidden. My mouth moved, my throat vibrating with a sound that wasn't entirely human. It felt as though my soul had found an old melody buried in my blood. The words were meaningless and sacred all at once, syllables of devotion and despair. The shadows echoed them. The choir below mirrored them, and for one terrible, perfect instant, the entire ship was singing through me. The warp quieted. The storm slowed. Through the viewport, I saw the golden figure stop its ascent. It turned, not toward the ship, but toward something unseen beyond us, and then it spoke without words. A command. And in that moment, I understood what the reflection truly was. It wasn't the Emperor's light I was seeing in the warp. It was his shadow, the part of him cast into the storm to hold it back, the part that looked into the abyss so the rest of him wouldn't have to. And now, it had noticed that we were looking back. The viewport fractured like ice. Reality rippled. The ship's alarms died one by one. Somewhere deep in my chest, something answered. The world had become nothing but light. Not brilliance in the mortal sense, but a devouring radiance that erased shadow, shape, and thought. For what could have been seconds or centuries, I drifted within it, aware only of the pulse that tethered me to the black ship. I no longer knew where my body ended and the ship began. Every vibration of its hull was the rhythm of my blood. Every scream of metal, the voice of my soul. Then through that sea of endless light, a sound rose. Not from outside, but from within. The choir's song, soft at first, then growing until it filled everything. Yet it was no longer the wail of torment I had always known. It was mournful, beautiful, the sound of a prayer half remembered by dying lips. Slowly, the light dimmed, peeling back in veils until the warp revealed itself again, vast, churning, and alive. The ship was moving, crawling forward through a storm that looked almost calm. Only then did I realize what had changed. The choir was gone. Every psyker who had once been bound below now lay silent, their essence burned away into golden ash that shimmered through the air like dust motes. And yet their voices lingered. They had not died, they had merged. Their minds had woven together, forming a single immense presence that filled the ship's spirit like blood in a new heart. It spoke, and when it did, its words came from every deck and every shadow. "You carried us. You saw him." I wanted to answer, but the sound caught in my throat. My body trembled. The veins beneath my skin glowed faintly with golden light, pulsing in rhythm with the ship itself. I was afraid to look down, afraid of what I would see. "We will return him to his path," the voices whispered. "We will hold the light until it breaks." Then came the roar. The warp screamed, not in rage, but in recognition. A great shape loomed before us, so immense it eclipsed even madness. The outline of something that was both machine and God. Its surface rippled with faces, billions of them, all human. Their mouths moved in silent prayer. It was not a demon. It was not divine. It was us. The echo of all humanity's fear and faith given form. The reflection of the Emperor's light through every mortal soul. The black ship did not run from it. It sang toward it. The hull shuddered as our course bent toward the impossible. The Geller field screamed one last time before collapsing entirely, the barrier between worlds dissolving into raw, luminous air. The figure reached for us, and for the first time I saw that its hand was my own. There was no pain, no sound, only stillness. In that stillness I saw everything. The dying stars of the Imperium, the hive cities drowned in shadow, the men and women who prayed every night to a throne that had long stopped hearing them. And in their prayers I felt the same pulse I carried now, faint, desperate, but still alive. Perhaps that was the truth the black ships had been built to hide, that the Emperor's light was never meant to guide ships through the void. It was meant to remind humanity that he was still fighting, not in gold or fire, but in every terrified heart that refused to stop believing. The warp folded inward. The figure dissolved, and when the light faded, I was standing once more in the observation deck. The ship was silent, dead. The stars of real space shone beyond the cracked viewport, cold, familiar, and impossibly distant. He was alone. The Vox was silent, the air still. But in that emptiness, a single whisper brushed the edge of my thoughts. "The signal is flesh." And then, more softly, almost lovingly, "Carry it home." I sank to my knees, staring out at the stars. And for the first time since the black ship had taken me, I prayed, not to be saved, not to be forgiven, but to be remembered, because I understood now. Every psyker who had ever lived aboard these vessels, every scream, every death, every light that had burned out, had not been a sacrifice. They had been a message, and we the damned were the messengers.